Welcome back to the critically acclaimed, Emmy-nominated series projecting the top 100. You'll notice I said nominated. We did not win. Harry, I am assuming you'll be writing a strongly worded letter to the Academy. How are you doing, man?
Absolutely. They got it wrong big time. But I'm doing great. Even with the L. Still doing great.
Well,
About you, Alan.
It's just nice to be recognized.
Very true.
But we will be taking home that hardware by the time we get to the end of this series. I'm doing pretty well. This is, again, projecting the top 100 players. If you're new here, Harry and I have been going through each of the NBA's 30 teams and figuring out which players on that roster we believe will be within the top 100 players in 9 category leagues for this fantasy basketball season. This is part 3. Today we are going to be hitting a couple teams in LA. Got Memphis, Miami, Minnesota on the dock, and your champions, the Milwaukee Bucks. So we have a lot to get to. Harry, are you down to go back and forth here, a little tit for tat?
Let's go for it.
I like it. Yeah, all right. We're gonna get right into it here. Not gonna waste any time. Aside from saying, if you're new here, please subscribe to the channel and drop a like on this video. Anyway, let's dive right in. Our first team on the docket is the Los Angeles Clippers, the Kawhi Leonard-less Los Angeles Clippers. Here are the players that Harry and I have identified as being top 100 guys this year. A little bit of a disagreement on where we think this Kawhi usage is going to primarily go to, perhaps. We both have Paul George, obviously. We both have Nick Batum, but I have Morris, you have Reggie Jackson, and Ivica Zubac. So I'm going to kick it to you first, Harry. Why do you... And let's just talk about Reggie Jackson versus Marcus Morris in particular, because those two are the two guys who I think are going to see the most bump in shot attempts outside George. Why did you go with Jackson over Morris? And did you even consider Marcus Morris?
I didn't consider Marcus Morris. I went with Reggie mainly because of his playing from last playoffs. And I was like, I think that's going to be carried over, especially when Kawhi went out. It really felt like he found his role on the team and his own expectations of them, or of himself with the team. So that's why I went with Reggie. And Marcus, I don't know. I've always felt he's almost so much of a role player that I like the potential for him to like break out and be top 100. I always am just hesitant on. Like I see him more of a Harrison Barnes, which Harrison Barnes got into the top 70 last year. So not saying it's impossible.
That's a top 100 guy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So not saying it's not possible, but like he's that guy who you pick in the like 110 range and just hopefully he hits the mark and gives you some value. But that's why I went with Reggie over Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not saying that Morris is going to be at the same level as a Barnes. Like, I think that he's not I don't think he's a short thing for this spot. But I do feel that he is a lead. In my mind, he's a leading candidate to be second on this team in shot attempts. Maybe that's just because of Morris's mindset.
Right.
But, I do think that there is some overlap with some of the Kawhi shot selection and some of what Morris can see. I think that we'll see him playing some more small ball 5 this year against certain lineups. And really, I in a way, I'm going with this as a hedge against really this backcourt rotation that's still really up in the air. We got some positive updates from Ty Lue in recent training camp where he said that his rough draft of a starting lineup is going to be Reggie Jackson, Eric Bledsoe, George, Morris, and Zubac. And Reggie and Bledsoe playing together that's a positive for me. I'd be concerned if those two get into a timeshare situation, though. Even despite how good Reggie played in the playoffs, it doesn't necessarily guarantee him a high usage role on this team. It certainly is possible. I'm not going to rule it out. I just see that Morris's role is more secure than other role players on this team. And I also think that should Paul George miss any time, which he almost certainly will here and there, I think that Morris is the guy who steps up to be the primary option offensively in that capacity. So I'm anticipating a bump in scoring and threes for Morris this year. If he can maintain decent enough rebounds, low turnovers, and decent percentages, then that's his pathway. So that's where I'm at on that. And then, if I could speak for both of us on Batum, this is similar to our stances on other low usage players that we've ranked in these lists previously. Like Batum is just the connector type of player. He will get you defensive stats and threes and boards and a little bit of assists. He'll just kind of do it all for you outside of points. He doesn't need a whole lot of usage to get to that rank, and he will also, in those small ball lineups I referenced, be playing a large role there.
Absolutely.
Popular name Terrence Mann didn't make either of our lists. He another guy who broke out in the playoffs last year. I think there's some buzz about him having a big season. Why'd you leave him off?
Too inexperienced at the moment, versus like Reggie Jackson, who is a veteran and has put up decent, just overall statistical performances on teams in the past.
Yeah.
And he's more of a flyer, and hopefully, like in the first week or two, and hopefully you get lucky.
Yeah, I mean, I love Terrence Mann. I mean, I'm no draft expert. I don't watch enough college ball, but every now and then I'll just watch some tape and stats, and I'll just like, hey, this guy looks like he could be something. And I was kind of hoping the Hawks would draft him in the second round, back where he went in, like, what was it, 2017, 18? I think it was 18. So, I feel, I don't know why I decided to brag about something that's completely unverifiable, but I've always liked Mann. That's my point. And I think that he could, there is an avenue for him to perhaps take that next step usage wise, but like you said, he's unproven, and he does have more guys in his way in the form of Jackson, Eric Bledsoe, Paul George to a degree even. He's going to have to work a little harder than some of these other role players to really carve out that role. So, go ahead and take him as like a last round flyer by all means. But I think Harry and I are just, we don't feel confident enough to put him in that range. Next team will be very simple. There's not any real disagreement here. And that is not my slides. Those are my slides. We're talking the Los Angeles Lakers. No disagreement here. We both have the big three: Anthony Davis, LeBron James, and Russell Westbrook. I'm not even going to bother asking you if you think that there's any other guys on this team that could crack this range. I really don't think there are. I mean, the tons of, these are just a bunch of role players. I mean, maybe we could talk about Talen Horton-Tucker finding a role, or Malik Monk, some exciting guys who can find minutes at the two. But I think I have a more pertinent question here. And I'll kick it to you on this too first, Harry. Of these three players, given where they're going in drafts right now, is there any that you are higher on than consensus or lower on than consensus?
Believe it or not, I'm actually lower on LeBron than consensus, especially considering he even was dropped to like that 25 range in mock drafts lately. I think if I'm the Lakers, I want to really save his legs, and he might play 50 games, but I'm going to try and rest him as much as I can. But like Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis should be able to walk into 50 games between the two of them. Yeah. Then plus LeBron being there for about 50, you're probably talking about a 55-win team just with that. So that's where I'd be like, okay, LeBron might be like in the 50s overall due to rest.
Yeah, no, I definitely, one of these three guys is going to have to end up resting a lot this year. But I also feel that there is a strong impetus within the team to make sure that there's not a repeat of what happened last year, where they fell to a 6 seed and got knocked out of the playoffs. Like there is absolutely going to be emphasis on these guys securing home court advantage, a top 3 seed perhaps. And they only have a smaller window than people want to say about this championship contention, and it does start with LeBron. I think that his health will be a priority. In a perfect world, he would be the guy that the Lakers would want to find rest for. So I do think that I am very curious to see how he and Westbrook interact with each other, and whether Westbrook's who really gives in that dynamic. We've seen Westbrook like not give an inch with virtually every single superstar in the NBA. LeBron's really the final frontier of that. So I'm fascinated to see how that works. I will say though, I'm higher on consensus than Anthony Davis, I think, because he's going around the 10 and 11 range. I think that there's a lot of concern just about him, his injuries that he's accumulated, all the statistical areas that he took a step back in last season. From things like, boards and blocks to oddly like percentages, like career lows across the board. And I chalk a lot of that stuff up to, obviously he was playing hurt. He was also playing pretty fatigued. The Lakers were right off of that bubble run, maybe like a month and a half in between. Davis, I think the free throw percentage is a huge indicator that this man was just tired a lot. Like he was like down to like 74%. He was at least an 80% free throw shooter in the past. So I want to anticipate like a return to the mean of sorts. But going back to what I was talking about this priority for the Lakers to be a top team in the West this year, Anthony Davis is the youngest guy on this team. Debatably, he is the most talented guy on this team at the stage. Probably LeBron still, but there's an argument to be made that this is his team going forward. And I think that he would want to prioritize being on the floor as much as he can this year. I think he's coming into the season healthy. And if you watch some of Lakers media day, there seems to be more of a willingness on his part to play center this year. And that is just an area on the floor where across the board, you see, from rebounding rate, shot blocking rate, 3-point attempts rate, like all the numbers go up when he plays at that spot. So I think that he could be one of the steals of the first round. But that's going to be dependent on your ability to trust his health and that he still has that top dog status in the offense among LeBron, and hopefully that Westbrook doesn't fly in and steal all his rebounds. So that's kind of where that real quick before we move on, do you have any particular thoughts on Westbrook in this situation here? Seems like he'd be the third option offensively, but I don't know. What do you see in that capacity?
So, going back to your LeBron point with the LeBron Westbrook point, I think it'll be very interesting because this is the first time Westbrook has never had like a co-star with him who has a different skill set. Both LeBron and Westbrook have very similar skill sets, and they're both not the best shooters. So I don't know how that's going to work with LeBron obviously being LeBron, and Westbrook he does his best impression of LeBron, which is pretty good. But but to that point, I think the person who's going to be third banana on the team is going to be Anthony Davis, at least offensively, just because LeBron and Westbrook need the ball in their hands to be effective more so than Davis, versus Davis can work off ball and spot up at times. But I do think you touched upon it that Davis will be the number one option for the defense for sure. He's gonna be the anchor.
I would anticipate that he finds a way to, if I were to guess of these three who plays the most games, it's probably going to be Davis or Westbrook. And that's kind of a crapshoot in which one, I guess, of those two it would be. I guess it's a matter of individual injury, and energy, I guess. Not that Westbrook has ever, I don't think Westbrook's ever lacked for energy in his entire life, though. So probably he wins that one. But yeah, that's the team there. And like we said, there's really, you can go ahead and check me if you disagree. I'm giving it pretty much a 0% chance that there's any other Laker on this team that's a top 100 player, unless like two of these three guys would like miss the entire season. Is there anyone
I gotta think it would be someone like Malik Monk, or maybe we see a random resurgence from Trevor Ariza with some steals and threes. But to the top 100, it would be a tough nut to crack. But maybe someone gets to like the top 120.
Yeah. I think Taylor.
Maybe.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, maybe. For me, I guess I'd look at Taylor Horton-Tucker just to see if he can maybe secure enough minutes at the two, either as a starter or off the bench. Because he definitely has the most interesting stat set, but there's just going to be such a usage drain on the role
Right.
players on this team between these three, and not to mention, Carmelo Anthony is going to find a way to take close to 10 shots a game too, just because
for sure.
it's Carmelo Anthony. So we'll see how things go. But yeah, I think we both feel very confident that these are the only three Lakers that you'll really need to worry about in 9 category leagues this season. Let's talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. We have similar lists here as well. We both have Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., and DeAnthony Melton, and have a little bit of disagreement on a fourth spot between Steven Adams and Kyle Anderson. And I don't dislike your fourth guy. I was actually considering Adams as well. Frankly, we might have too many people on this list, but I think that the really interesting guy that warrants the most debate is one at the top, the most noteworthy name, Ja Morant. This is a guy in 9 cat leagues who has not even gotten close to top 100 value over the last few seasons, over his first 2 NBA seasons. I put him on this list as not someone who is going to blast through and be a top 70 type of player. Like, I think that if I were to anticipate a best case scenario for Morant this year, jumps up his scoring to something in the low 20s on a per game basis, maintains 7 assists, maybe finds a way to get more involved in the rebounding game. That seems unlikely now that Steven Adams is in town. He did have JV there before. Maybe steals or threes. I'm not sure. There's a lot of areas that Morant can improve, but if you just believe in him in general, which I do, I think that the team, I think that it's at a certain point he has to get to that range. Right. Talk me through your rationale in putting him there. And as a part 2 to that question, where would you recommend people drafting him in 9 category leagues? Because even if I do think he's going to get to the top 100, my opinion is that he's almost certainly going to get over drafted.
No, absolutely. I guess I'll go with your second question first.
Yeah,
I believe in mocks, I've seen him going. Oh, no worries. No, you're good. I believe in mocks, I've been seeing him go in the 3rd round. I think it's solely because of hype. Which, don't get me wrong, as a basketball fan, completely understand. But for fantasy purposes, I definitely see maybe a top 85 finish this year. To your point, Alan, I think his scoring is going to go up, especially now that Valanciunas isn't there, and Steven Adams is definitely not a big-time scorer by any means. And if that can go up and maybe he can get 1 to 2 assists more per game, let's say Jaren Jackson becomes a better rim runner for him, plus he has a decent 3-ball for a big man, maybe he can hit the top 85.
Yeah, to me.
And I guess I didn't even answer your question too.
That's
sorry.
fine. Yeah, that's why I was about asking. You never ask people 2 questions at the same time.
No, I guess personally, I think you probably should be drafting him around round 5. He should be in that DeJounte Murray, Ben Simmons type of range. Maybe a little bit earlier, but that's where I would draft him, or just not draft him at all.
Yeah, I think most times I would say that you just can't draft him at all just because the ADP is so out of whack.
Right.
You have to reach to get him. The only scenario where drafting him close to where his ADP is, and that's assuming that he takes this bump that you and I are projecting that he will, you have to be in a pretty serious punt build to take on Morant to justify that. Yeah. You got to be punting turnovers, 1 or both defensive stats, maybe even rebounds as well. It might be a 5 to 4 punt type of deal where you're focusing on points and assists, and hoping that he takes some. Those are his real contributing categories and positive categories in fantasy up to this point. You got to assume that he's taking I would assume if he is taking the scoring bump like we both do, that there would be a plus in efficiency. He's good at he's good at scoring around the rim, so might be a decent source of field goal percentage for a guard spot. Maybe if we see more Jaren Jackson as the primary center, that opens up an avenue for Ja Morant to get more involved as a rebounder. Maybe he takes a step up in steals. There's a lot of mental gymnastics there. I feel like I'm selling. The more we talk about it, the harder it is to justify it. But this is an incredibly talented player. It's going to happen at some point, but it's not going to be anywhere near general consensus or expectations on where they think he should be. So I'm not saying don't draft Ja Morant, but you should be very careful about how you do it. I think you have to be a very specific punt build to take him on. Let's talk about some of the other areas where we agree. In particular, Jaren Jackson, I don't think there's a lot of debate for. If this man stays healthy, he seems like he walks into top 100 value, just a fantastic 9-category leagues player. Let's talk about DeAnthony Melton, who, if you guys are not regular hoop ball listeners, you might be surprised to see that name. If you are, then there might even be a degree of rolling your eyes because we only talk about DeAnthony Melton all the time. And we always are sounding the alarm bells. Thinking like this is the year it's going to happen for him. Well, I'm here to tell you all, this is the year it's going to happen for him. This is DeAnthony Melton has got one of the greatest per minute fantasy games of anyone, especially guards in the NBA. And in particular, this past offseason, the Grizzlies sort of cleared a way for him to get to a regular 20-minute role. Grayson Allen, a guy who took the majority of those minutes from him last year, is now in Milwaukee. They did not bring anyone back in any real capacity to take those minutes from him. You could say maybe Jarrett Culver. I don't think that he's as talented as Melton, and I don't think he'll be really going for those minutes, maybe more minutes at the 3. I think that Melton, if you give him 20 minutes, he's a top 100 player. And everything I've seen from him, I feel very confident in saying that. So really, this is just me saying that I just believe he's going to see that amount of playing time this year. Why did you put him on your list?
I mean, pretty much the same reasons. I think his playing time is going to increase, and just being an avid hoop baller and just hearing similar to I feel like with us real in the weeds fantasy guys, there's Danny Melton and then there's Derek White. Like two guys who are just like, one of these years they're going to put it all together and they're just going to knock our socks off. So I mean, he's going to get more minutes this year. And I'm hoping at least top 70 value for a potentially, I don't even know where he's being ranked in mock drafts right now.
He's well outside. He's not even getting taken inside the top 120 picks. He's absolutely still an under the radar guy. And I do get it because he's a bench player with low name recognition who is not going to step into a starting role. Like he is going to see a large role this year, but typically when you hype around guys who get to that range, it's usually because they're getting moving into a starting role. People don't see Grayson Allen leaving as big of a bump as it should be, because Allen was not a very productive fantasy player. Melton, if you're unfamiliar, this is a guy who can get you an absolute ton of steals, terrific on both percentages, low turnovers. He's a great connector on offense. He can get you some assists. He can get you some rebounds. He can get you some threes. I just listed 8 categories, I'm pretty sure. This is a guy who can really contribute all across the board. He's just incredibly talented too. Probably better than Dylan Brooks. Maybe not. I mean, I don't watch enough Grizzlies games to make that call. David Williams,
he shoots too much.
I mean, great defender, Dylan Brooks. Who you'll notice neither of us put on our list, despite the fact that he scores a lot of points, but that's kind of all he does. Maybe some threes and steals. Hoopball Grizzlies host David Williams has been fielding questions and complaints from us for years, yelling about why isn't DeAnthony Melton getting more playing time, and he's just kind of tossing his hands up. But y'all should tune into that podcast. Maybe he'll have more answers for you this time around, because I do think there's some optimism heading into this season for Melton's role in general. Well, I think that's enough time on the Grizzlies. They're always a really interesting fantasy team, and surely there's probably a name that we didn't even touch on that might even emerge at some point this year. They got talent across the board. Here's a team that's pretty top-heavy in the talent capacity, though, in my opinion. Miami Heat, you and I are in total agreement on this one. We only think that Butler, Adebayo, and Kyle Lowry will be the top 100 players on this team. I will ask about if there's anyone else you're considering, but how do you feel in general about Butler, about really just about these three in fantasy drafts, particularly Butler and Adebayo, who are very early to mid second round targets. Butler last year was a first round player. Adebayo was a solid second round player. Do you feel that those two are going to be in the same range this year, or do you think that there's a possibility that they take a step back?
I think I'm not sure if both or one of them will take a step back, but for sure, I think with Kyle Lowry being there, they're both will have some usage decrease with on ball. Solely just because Lowry can facilitate.
Yeah.
It can help Bam be put in positions that are easier for him to score, and same with Jimmy. But with that, we may see some scoring bumps for Jimmy and Bam, but part of the things that make them so valuable in fantasy is those assist numbers from the small forward position, from Bam in the power forward center position. So like they offer you that versatility of different types of categories that you don't necessarily get in those positions. And that might take a hit this year. Then again, who knows if Spoelstra decides that he still wants to run the offense through Jimmy and Bam, and then Lowry might have a little bit of decrease in value. So it's a little bit up in the air, but I'm definitely more concerned about Bam and Jimmy.
I'm a little bit the other way. I'm not sure if I can call it concern, but I think that Lowry's presence will impact Butler more than Bam, specifically just because Butler, for all intents and purposes, was the point guard for Miami last year. He was functionally their point guard, and now that's Kyle Lowry. So, just in terms of like role on the team, Butler is going to be the one to transition into another one, or at the very least, split it with Kyle Lowry. I think that Adebayo, I think that I'm not concerned about his playmaking taking a huge dip just because at the position of where he is doing it. I think that those touches are unique to him. And I think that it creates, that just creates unique offensive advantages in different matchups for Bam to continue being in that facilitator role and to the degree that he is. I think that Butler is going to take a step back in his playmaking, but like you said, there might be a trade-off there, and he might be more of a scorer. And I do think that there could be just some point guard by committee thing. Really, if anything, I think Lowry. I agree. I think Lowry is the guy who takes the largest step back. Just older dude, new environment. New point guards always struggle to adjust to new team settings. It comes with the gig. They're supposed to be floor managers, and they've got an entirely new cast of players and teammates to learn the tendencies of. So I think Lowry might start the year off pretty slow, but he's too talented to not be top 100 on a per game basis, in my estimation. And I still think that Butler is, even though I said I think he's going to take a step back in assists, I think he's still a fine to honestly possibly even a steal of a second round option. In a certain capacity. He probably won't be a top 10 player again in 9 category leagues this year, but it's far from impossible. And I'd say the same for Adebayo, not being a top 10 player, but as someone who, if anything, will return similar value to what he did last year, maybe even higher, just because he's a guy I'm really high on, still a young prospect with a lot of just one of those guys who adds something new to his game every season. You'd never count out guys like that. He at some point he's going to expand his range to a point where he's contributing in a lot of different ways, I think. As he already is. Any other players on the Heat that are worth talking about? You know, they have interesting names on the roster, like noteworthy names like Victor Oladipo, Tyler Hero, PJ Tucker, like guys that people know. Are any of them fantasy values this year? Do you think any have a top 100 chance?
So the only one I would consider would be Duncan Robinson, because he's such a low usage player, where if he can up his rebounds just a little bit, get his normal amount of threes, maybe increase the percentage just a tad there, that's where I consider maybe he could hit a top 100 ranking. But other than that, definitely staying away from Oladipo, especially coming off another surgery over the summer. And Tyler Hero has to win us all back over.
Yeah.
He had a nice bubble performance, but last year was not his best.
Yeah, he definitely. I think that the hype. He was always set up to fail with that hype. He was never the
Right.
player that people were considering him to be, and so to a degree, he might now be. This pendulum might be swinging the other way, where people might be counting him out too much. I'm not saying that he.
Mhm.
I agree with you. He's not a top 100 player that I'm even thinking about really at all right now. Maybe in some
Right.
capacity, but yeah, Duncan. If like he figures out his percentages in a pretty meaningful way. But Duncan Robinson's got one of those starting forward spots locked down. He's the other guy
Absolutely.
that I'd possibly consider, but I do think that there might just not be enough there to really get him over the hump. Like unlike Joe Harris in Brooklyn, who similar stat set obviously, but he is just someone
Right.
who I think will just see more opportunity than Robinson
Mhm.
will. Just by virtue of how wide open he will always be. Duncan Robinson, he's a fantastic shooter, but he's like the only fantastic shooter on this team.
Right.
So he's not going to get the barrage of open looks that Harris may in that capacity. I think very similar players. Both you'll find outside the top
Right.
100 picks, but I'd probably think Harris has a better shot at getting there. Second to last team here are defending champs, the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton. You all don't need us to really give much insight as to why we put them there. I really like the fourth guy you put there too, and I was going to add him, but I had him just out on the cusp, and I decided not to include him. But I am full. I really do like the direction you've taken this guy, Bobby Portis, top 100 player. Give us the spiel. What were you thinking with him here?
So he was close to top 100 last year. I think that Coach Bud is going to give him some more minutes at the 4 this year with Giannis, specifically because the whole small ball lineup, I guess if you call Giannis at the 5, being 7 feet tall already small, really worked out for him in the playoffs last year. And when the coaches usually see like the new lineups work out for him, they tend to use it more the next season than they did before. Like see Steve Kerr circa 2016. So I think he's going to get a bump in minutes. Plus Brook Lopez, he's older. I think he's 33, 34, somewhere around that range now. And I think they're going to try and save him for the playoffs. So Bobby won't be like top 50 or anything, but I think he might finish in 80 to 100 range potentially. Granted, I've been saying that about a lot of players so far on this this call, so we'll see.
Hey, I mean, look, 80 to 100, that's 20 different guys. So unless you said that more than 20 times over the duration of these shows, you're not off target yet. And I especially with that last point, that's where I was really high on Portis as someone who I think is going to play more for Milwaukee this year, because Brook Lopez is, of all the Bucks starters, I think he's the leading candidate to see a dial back of regular season action, maybe some load management here and there. We've really yet to see that from Budenholzer and the Bucks, but this is a team that just went on a deep playoff run and are now 2 months removed from it. I mean, look at what happened to the Lakers and the Heat after their bubble playoff run. Those two teams were decimated by injuries early on. Fatigue set in. There is a total argument to make that you want to give your older players some leeway to stay fresh for the playoffs. And, we might see that with Drew Holiday in some capacity, maybe Middleton to some degree, but I think Lopez is one that I definitely can see that argument the most for. And Portis is a direct beneficiary of that. He is the sixth man on this team, really. Obviously beloved in Milwaukee. They just re-signed him. I think that he's going to be given more responsibilities this year, just in terms of playing out, getting shots up, getting minutes from Lopez, and he was borderline top 100 last year. If you assume that all that's going to happen, there's an argument to be made that he finds his way to that 80 to 100 range. So I think I totally agree with that. I kind of regret not putting him on my list, but I am in full agreement with you. He strikes me as the sneaky top 100 guy on this team if there were one. And honestly, there's really nothing else to say about this team.
Right.
The only way that Holiday or Middleton don't crack the top 100 is if there's some type of injury. Hopefully there isn't. And there's just and Giannis is Giannis. No real debate about that there. So we'll move on to our final team on the docket. It's the young and exciting Minnesota Timberwolves. A lot of hype around these guys this year. Unfortunately, a bunch of drama recently with the Gerson Rosas firing over 6 days out from the start of training camp, I believe, which is always the telltale sign of a dumpster fire franchise. Not that Minnesota necessarily is right now. Of course, they have been at plenty of times in the past, and to be fair, from what I've read, that firing seemed to be pretty justified. But let's talk about these players here. I have Towns. I have Towns and Edwards. You have Towns and Edwards. You also have D'Angelo Russell. I'm going to start and just say that, Karl Anthony Towns needs no real defense for this spot. Anthony Edwards is someone who I'm particularly high on as someone who, he's being drafted pretty high right now. He's in like the mid 40s to early 50s range, which, to be fair, is there's not a lot of wiggle room for him to get you value at that spot. But I do think that he can reach that range in fantasy this year in 9-category leagues. We saw it towards the end of last year in Minnesota. He took on his efficiency just went through the roof when Chris Finch took over. I mean, he really adjusted to the NBA game in an impressive way in the second half of the season. High usage, good scorer, threes and steals, can get you a little bit of rebounds in there too. And I think that he, in particular, what was most noteworthy to me, and I'll be really interested to see if this carries over this season. After Chris Finch took over, Towns and Edwards averaged the same amount of shot attempts per game, and I think that is a pretty strong endorsement of how Finch views Edwards in this offense as like a 1B to Towns' 1A. I think he values his ability to be a creator on the perimeter. And I think that I'd expect that trend to continue this year. I think these two bear the brunt of this offense together. And that's part of why I didn't include D'Angelo Russell, because he's a name, but he's not as talented as Edwards, and he's not is tied into the future plans as Edwards is. So I think that, he is just I just think that he's not going to have enough shot attempts. I'm sorry, I was getting a phone call. I don't know if you lost me in my microphone.
Oh, no, we're good.
Fantastic. It's an argument that I was making was, D'Angelo is just not going to have the shot volume. I think that he needs to be a top 100 player because of that. He's very volume dependent. He's still going to be competing with Malik Beasley for shots, and maybe an outside chance of Jaden McDaniels too. So that's enough of my spiel. Why did you put Russell on there, and is there anyone else that you'd be considering here?
So with Russell, I think, especially given where he's going in mock drafts, he has the potential to completely blow his ranking out of the water. Because to your point, Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns will probably be 1A, 1B scoring wise on offense. But as we've known, even on a team like Brooklyn from 3 years ago, before Durant and Kyrie were there, D'Angelo Russell is always going to put up his shots, while at the same time still giving you 6 assists a game. Plus 2 3-pointers, if not 3, because I think 2 seasons ago he averaged 3 3-pointers for the season. I think he has a real chance to be one of the best sleepers given where his current draft position is. And I mean, worst case scenario, I'm wrong and he's not top 50, but I don't think he will be out of the top 100 this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, he definitely gets to that range. I've just never been really high on him in 9-cat leagues, and maybe that's just a bias of mine getting in the way here. But he's definitely someone who, he's absolutely. He would be the third guy if I were to choose one. The last name that I want to talk about is just that he's been hyped up a lot, probably more of an appealing dynasty player than for this particular season. But Jaden McDaniels figures to be a starter in Minnesota this season. There's been some talk about him. Some have projected him as a 4. I initially did, but there's been a lot of talk about him playing at the 3 a lot more, bringing Malik Beasley off the bench. Do you think that he's someone who has a shot at top 100 value this year, or do you think there's just not enough shots?
I mean, between Karl-Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, and D'Angelo Russell, that's a lot of shots right there. Plus Malik Beasley potentially. So, like, as soon as you take one of either Edwards or D'Lo off the bench, you're bringing in Malik Beasley. I don't think there's enough shots for him this year.
Yeah, I mean, if the argument, I guess, would be that you think that he takes a large leap in both defensive stats and threes,
Right.
which is where he excels, but it would take pretty large numbers in both to get there. He's not a particularly strong rebounder yet, but I agree that he might be a year removed from getting to this point, but I am high on him, and he's definitely someone I'm looking at towards the end of drafts. But yeah, that is kind of the wrap on these guys. That's the wrap on our 6 teams for part 3. 2 more parts to go, Harry. Feeling pretty good so far about maybe hitting the top 100 area, like 100 players.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid I'm already at 70 or something, and we still have 12 of these 12 teams to go. So it will be interesting to see how many I have.
Yeah, likewise, we'll see how that pans out. Part 4 and part 5 should be on the way soon. Thanks again, Harry, as always, for joining me on this. Please subscribe to the Hoopball YouTube channel if you like videos like these and want to see more stuff like that. Drop a like. Let us know in the comments what you think about our rankings. Did we overlook anyone? Are we too high, too low on some of these players? Let us know. We love the feedback. And yeah, that's it for now. We will check in with you all for part 4 next time. See y'all later.
See ya.